This week we have Dr. Tatsushi Arai. He is the Associate Professor of Peacebuilding and Conflict Transformation at SIT Graduate Institute, and he's here to teach our Comparative Identity-Based Conflicts course. So thank you very much
for
your time. So in as close to as an ideal society as we could possibly create, how would we construct and maintain a heterogeneous nation that would not experience a violent clash of identities? What specific actions, prescriptions would a nation, community do to build a harmonious society comprised of various identities?
I think in terms of the vision that your question is implying to look for, it is a society that seeks diversity as a basis for social harmony. In a sense of the differences that do not get manipulated into a destruction of violence, yet differences become the source of vitality for the individual human beings as well as communities to be able to coexist, dialogue about differences, aging or growth. In a very broad outline that I believe is a vision to search for.
I was thinking myself when I asked this in my head, maybe when you have in class you talk about symbols and calendar being such important things that create a unified identity. How possible would it be to create a more humanistic calendar, for instance, where all holidays are celebrated by everyone, Christian, Muslim, several holidays, a calendar that's more humanistic. Would such a thing make a difference in a multicultural society?
The point about those symbols, ceremonies, and stories that become the hallmarks of cultural diversity, as well as sometimes cultural division, has to do with the awareness that those are all human constructs. So some of those human constructs come out of a deliberate human choice to use those constructs as tools to achieve certain goals. So those constructs become instruments, and those instruments can be manipulated. Those instruments can be used to promote peace building. And the first step is to be conscious of the value and the mechanism of making those instruments. On the other hand, there are so many situations where we as individuals and community members are unaware that we are actually shaped and reshaped by those constructs surrounding us, as natural as the language we speak. I think that's where the value of peace education comes. And as to your question of how and whether peace-oriented constructs are possible, I think the question is to really ask what kind of dialogue would enable the respective communities to come up with whatever constructs they wish, with the full consciousness of their own local grounded theories of peace that then find expression in those constructs. So there are celebrations in some communities that actually value both Christianity and Islam, Hinduism and Islam, etc., etc. Those things are already there. Only that in some societies whereby, let's say, the Hindu-Muslim or Christian-Islam relationship is difficult, I think it is in those societies where those dialogues have to take place to intentionally construct those things. For my own observation, we tend to see so many of monuments that celebrate war heroes, that soldiers holding guns. But we don't really see so many monuments that symbolize mothers holding babies. Yeah? Or maybe children playing envisioning some sort of a future. And that has to do with the people who actually designed those monuments and funded the construction of those monuments. There's a political economy to it. And I think the first step is to talk about it.
To what extent can we say that many conflicts considered to be identity-based conflicts are actually not so? In so many cases, identity has been politicized and exploited to divide people. But when we look deeper into a conflict, we see that the sources are based on competition over resources or fight for liberty. So, in many conflicts, it's on the surface we see it's identity. It's a clash of I don't know, Kurds and Turks, for instance. But when we look deeper, we see there's more. It's not so much identity, but social, economic, political issues.
I think any of the large-scale, deep-rooted historical conflicts are multifaceted. They have lots of cultural / identity-oriented elements, and that same set of conflicts have structural, institutional elements. They are always intertwined. To me, identity-related aspects may be either salient or dormant. They may occupy a central focus of attention at any given time of the conflict's life cycle, or they may become less visible. So the term we use, identity-based conflicts, has to be used in a very careful manner. Because I think the moment we use such terms as identity-based conflicts, we depict an image that they are primarily, if not exclusively, about identity. When, as you said, that may not be so, especially when we do a very careful causal analysis, not just exacerbating factors to be analyzed. So for that reason, what I think we try to explore this week with the students is to bring the identity elements in the foreground of our attention, while we pay a serious attention in the background, all other issues from political, economic to anything else. Always reminding ourselves that in any theatrical orchestration there is a foreground and background. Both are important and intertwined. Without the foreground, there is no background. There is no background. If there is no background, there is no foreground. Interdependent. Yeah.
So still pay attention to the identities that are.
Of course.
There.
It is in the interdependence of things. Holistically and systemically, we understand conflict and do something about it.
And you have such a rich experience of training people all over the world. In your experience, what is the biggest misunderstanding about identity-based conflict? Another question that I could ask is how must the field of peace and conflict studies better develop to address identity and conflict dynamics? Or what do you recommend students is essential to understand about conflict, to understand about culture and identity if they want to make the biggest impact?
If I'm asked what the biggest challenge or misunderstanding is in the context of training on conflict issues, it is very hard to point out one. But one typical thing that we see is definitely polarization, the simplification of we-ness and they-ness. And this unfortunately is everywhere. And its roots may be traced to deep human desire for survival, for one to survive and for one to see a perceived enemy. It is natural for life-affirming person and people to want to protect ourselves. And when doing so is perceived to be at the risk, at the cost of somebody to be set aside, then that becomes a basis for we-ness and they-ness. And the first step is to be self-conscious of those things happening. And awareness raising is is a very important way in which we can begin to talk about it.
Mhm.
So that leads to the beginning of an answer to your second question. Greater education, awareness cultivation about those human dynamics that are quite typical and constant, so that there is a greater peace culture that is able to turn those perceived challenges as opportunities for knowing each other better, and trying to find the undercurrents of the turbulent water, so as to anchor our existence and coexistence in the undercurrents. So maybe those are some of the points.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for your time, for your course this week.
Thank you very much.